A single mother rushing through the bitter winter streets with her 6-year-old daughter suddenly noticed an elderly man dressed far too thin for the weather, shaking uncontrollably on a bus stop bench. Instead of walking on like everyone else, she tightened her grip on her daughter's hand, stepped toward him, and gently asked if he was all right. Then she guided him into a warm diner and paid for his breakfast with her last few dollars, never knowing he was the missing father of a billionaire. What happened next, sparked by that single act of kindness, would alter her life forever. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from, subscribe and get hyped, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The wind sliced through the early morning air, sharp and bitter flurries of snow sweeping across the frozen streets of Bridgeport. Sarah Mitchell pulled her coat tighter around her thin frame, one hand gripping the frayed scarf at her neck, the other holding the small fingers of her 6-year-old daughter Emma. The snow crunched beneath their worn boots as they trudged down the narrow sidewalk, their breath visible in short puffs. They were both shivering. "I'm cold, Mama," Emma whispered, her cheeks flushed red from the brutal wind. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand gently, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "I know, sweetheart. Just a few more blocks to the community center, okay? Miss Patricia will have the heater on." Her own fingers burned inside threadbare gloves. The furnace in their studio had been broken for 3 days, the landlord promising tomorrow again and again. Last night they slept in layers, huddled beneath every blanket they owned, towels stuffed along the windowsills to stop the drafts that still seeped through. Sarah worked 2 jobs, mornings at the diner on 5th Street, smiling through exhaustion for tips that barely covered groceries, and nights cleaning office buildings while the city slept. And somehow she carved out a third life in the quiet corners of the public library. While Emma did homework or played nearby, Sarah taught herself programming through free online courses. 18 months now. 18 months of staring at screens until her eyes burned, of watching tutorial videos with headphones on so she wouldn't disturb other library patrons, of building practice applications on borrowed computers. She was building something. A way out. A future where Emma wouldn't have to wear shoes with holes in them, or go to bed hungry, or feel the cold seep through broken windows. They rounded the corner onto Madison Avenue, and Sarah noticed him immediately. An elderly man sat hunched on a bus stop bench, his body curled against the cold. He wore no coat, just a thin cardigan over a button-down shirt, dress slacks that looked expensive once but were soaked through at the knees and stained with something dark, mud, maybe, or worse. His white hair stood up in wild tufts, and his hands trembled as he clutched at the air, as if holding something only he could see. People walked past him. A woman in a business suit quickened her pace, eyes fixed on her phone. A jogger veered wide around the bench without breaking stride. A delivery driver glanced over, shook his head, then looked away. The old man's lips were moving, forming words Sarah couldn't hear from across the street. His voice carried on the wind, fragments of sentences, half memories spoken to no one. Sarah should keep walking. She was already running late, and Emma needed to get inside where it was warm. The community center opened at 7 o'clock, and Sarah's shift at the diner started at 7:30. She had exactly 23 minutes to drop Emma off and catch the bus across town. But something about the man's posture, the way he rocked slightly back and forth, talking to ghosts, reminded her of her own grandfather in his final days. Before the stroke, before the confusion set in, before he'd stopped recognizing her face, before he'd sat in his chair talking to people who'd been dead for years. "Come on, baby," Sarah said softly, guiding Emma across the intersection. As they approached, the man's voice became audible. "The birthday cake," he murmured, his gaze unfocused, staring at something only he could see. "White frosting, 7 candles, had to be perfect for my boy. 7 years old today." No, was 7 years old. He wanted the cake with the race cars on it. Red and blue, his favorite colors. Margaret knew, she always knew what he wanted. Sarah slowed her steps, uncertain. Emma pressed closer to her side. "I should have gone," the man continued, his voice rising and falling like a tide. "She asked me to go get the cake. Margaret, my sweet Margaret. But I was busy. Important phone call. Business, always business." His hands shook harder, grasping at nothing. So Margaret went instead. The roads were icy that day. Black ice on the bridge over the river. They said she didn't suffer, But how could they know? How could they possibly know if she called out for me? If she was afraid? If she... His voice cracked, and Sarah felt her own throat tighten with sympathy. "Sir?" she said gently, crouching down in front of him. Emma tucked herself against Sarah's back, peering around at the old man with wide, worried eyes. The man's eyes found Sarah's face, and for a moment, something flickered across his weathered features: confusion, fear, a desperate kind of hope. He looked to be in his mid-70s, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth, the kind that spoke of years of worry and grief. "Are you Margaret?" he whispered. "Did you come back?" "No, sir, I'm Sarah." She kept her voice soft and steady. "What's your name? Can you tell me your name?" He blinked slowly, as if the question required great effort to understand. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at his trembling hands, then back at Sarah's face. "My name," he repeated, sounding lost. I should know that. Shouldn't I? Why can't I remember my own name?" Panic crept into his voice, his breathing quickening. I don't know who I am. Why can't I remember? What's wrong with me?" "It's okay," Sarah said quickly, her heart breaking at the fear in his eyes. "It's okay, don't worry about that right now. You're safe, that's what matters." She glanced down, looking for anything that might help: a wallet, an ID, something. That's when she noticed it: a weathered hospital band on his wrist, partially hidden by his damp sleeve. She gently took his hand, pushing back the cardigan sleeve just enough to see the smudged printing on the faded blue band. Walter Harrison Dobb. March 15, 1948, Meadowbrook Memory Care. "Walter," Sarah said gently, releasing his hand. "Your name is Walter Harrison." The old man, Walter, stared at her as if she'd performed a miracle. "Walter," he repeated slowly, testing the word. "Walter Harrison. That's my name. Yes, I think that's right." Relief flooded his face, but it was quickly replaced by more confusion. "But how did you know? Do I know you? Should I remember you?" "No, sir, we just met. I saw it on your hospital band." Sarah gestured to his wrist. Walter looked down at the band, as if seeing it for the first time, his brow furrowing. "Hospital band. Why am I wearing?" His voice trailed off. He looked around at the snow-covered street, the bus stop, his own wet clothes, as if trying to piece together a puzzle with missing pieces. "I don't understand. Where am I? How did I get here?" "You're on Madison Avenue, in Bridgeport," Sarah told him, trying to keep her voice calm and reassuring. "Do you know where you live? Is there someone I can call to come get you?" But Walter wasn't listening anymore. His eyes had drifted past her, unfocused again. "Benjamin," he murmured. "My son. He's angry with me, so angry. I don't blame him. I wasn't there, you see, not for his 7th birthday. Margaret went for the cake, and she never came home. And I still didn't stop, kept working, building an empire." He laughed, a bitter sound that hurt to hear. "An empire. And I lost everything that mattered. My wife, my son, all of it. Gone." Sarah glanced around, hoping someone else would step in, someone with more resources, more time, more of anything than she had. But the street was emptying as people hurried to escape the cold, everyone carefully not looking at the confused old man on the bench. "Mr. Harrison." Sarah tried again, her voice gentle. "Walter, when did you last eat? Do you remember?" Walter looked down at his hands, turning them over as if they might hold the answer. "Eat?" he repeated, seeming confused by the concept. Then, as if his body suddenly remembered what his mind had forgotten, his stomach made a loud gurgling sound. He pressed both hands against his abdomen, his face contorting with surprise and pain. "Oh, I don't. When did I?" His voice trailed off. He looked down at himself, at his wet, stained clothes, his feet in soaking dress socks with no shoes, as if seeing his condition for the first time. Confusion washed over his face, followed by something like shame, and then fear. "I don't know where I am," he whispered, and the lost quality in his voice broke something in Sarah's chest. "I don't know how I got here. I was looking for something, someone. Margaret, Benjamin, I can't." He pressed his hands harder against his stomach as it growled again, louder this time. His whole body began to shake, though whether from cold, hunger or distress, Sarah couldn't tell. "It hurts," he said, so softly she almost didn't hear. "Everything hurts. I'm so cold, and I think I'm hungry, very hungry, but I don't remember When did I last? Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Mama? Emma whispered, tugging on Sarah's coat. Is he okay? He looks like Grandpa used to look. Before he went to heaven. Sarah's throat tightened. She opened her worn wallet with trembling fingers and counted the bills inside. $17. That was all she had until Friday, 3 days away. $17 she'd been saving for months to finally buy herself a proper pair of winter boots. Her own soles were worn so thin she could feel every shard of ice through them, and her feet ached constantly from the cold. But this man, this confused, hungry, suffering man who couldn't even remember his own name, he was sitting here in the freezing cold with no coat, no shoes, talking to ghosts and clutching his empty stomach. And everyone was just walking past. What kind of world was this, where people could see someone suffering and just keep walking? Sarah closed her wallet and made her decision, feeling something shift inside her chest, something that felt like choosing to be the person she wanted Emma to grow up to be, even when it cost more than she could afford. Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Walter, there's a diner just down the block. Let's get you inside where it's warm, get some food in you, and we'll figure out how to find your son Benjamin. Does that sound okay? Walter looked at her with such desperate hope that it hurt to see. You'll help me? He asked, his voice small and uncertain, like a child's. Why did you stop? Because you needed help, Sarah said simply, reaching out to take his arm. And because someone would want someone to help my father if he was lost and alone like this. That's all. That's everything. Walter whispered, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. That's everything. Sarah helped Walter to his feet, but his legs were unsteady, weakened by cold and hunger and whatever confusion gripped his mind. He leaned heavily on her arm, and Sarah felt the full weight of him, felt how fragile he was, beneath the expensive clothes. Emma moved to his other side without being asked, too small to support him, but taking his trembling hand in both of hers, with that natural kindness children have before the world teaches them to look away. It's okay, Emma said, looking up at him with her serious 6-year-old face. My mama makes everything better, she always does. They began walking slowly toward the diner, Walter shuffling between them. Every few steps he would press his free hand to his stomach and wince. Once he stumbled, and Sarah had to brace herself to keep him upright, feeling the strain in her own tired shoulders. But then Walter stopped walking entirely. Wait, he said, his voice panicked. Wait, where are we going? Who are you? Are you taking me somewhere? I don't know you. Should I know you? It's okay, Walter. I'm Sarah, remember? We just met a moment ago. We're going to get you some breakfast. You said you're hungry. Sarah, he repeated, as if testing the name. Sarah. And you're helping me. Yes, I'm helping you. This seemed to satisfy something in him. He started walking again, but now he stayed very close to Sarah, his hand gripping her arm tighter than before. When she tried to guide him around a patch of ice, he resisted slightly, as if afraid of being separated. You won't leave, will you? He asked again, his voice trembling. Promise you won't leave. I promise, Sarah said. I'm right here. They made it another half block before he stopped again, the same confusion clouding his eyes. Where are we going? Walter asked, the same panic creeping into his voice. Did you tell me? I can't remember if you told me. To get you breakfast, Walter, at the diner. You're hungry, remember? Your stomach hurts. Oh, he looked down at his stomach, pressed his hand against it as it growled loudly. Yes, hungry. I'm very hungry. I don't remember when I ate last. Do you know? Can you tell me? I don't know, but we're going to fix that right now. See that diner right there? Just a few more steps. But Walter had latched onto something else now. What's my name again? He asked, his voice small and frightened. I forgot already. I'm sorry. I know you told me. Why can't I remember? Walter, Sarah said patiently, her heart breaking. Your name is Walter Harrison, and it's okay that you forgot. You don't need to apologize. Walter, he repeated, as if committing it to memory, though Sarah suspected it would slip away again within minutes. Walter Harrison. That's me. That's who I am. They walked slowly to Joe's diner, the same place where Sarah worked her morning shifts 4 days a week. They finally reached Joe's diner, but when Sarah tried to open the door, Walter balked, pressing himself against her side like a frightened child. I don't know this place, he whispered. Is it safe? Will Margaret be there? Joe was behind the counter when they entered, his eyebrows rising as he took in the unlikely trio: Sarah, who shouldn't be here, for another 40 minutes, a small girl who should be at the community center, and an elderly man in soaking wet dress clothes, who was clinging to Sarah's arm, as if his life depended on it. Sarah, you're not on until 7:30, I know Joe. Sarah's voice was tired but steady. This is Mr. Harrison, he's lost and cold, and very hungry. He needs help. Joe's expression, usually gruff, softened immediately. He'd been in the diner business for 30 years and had seen everything. Booth in the back, he said, already moving. I'll bring coffee, hot and strong. He disappeared into his office and returned with a faded plaid blanket, the kind that had seen better days but was clean and thick. Keep this in here for emergencies, he said gruffly, handing it to Sarah. Looks like this qualifies. Sarah tried to guide Walter to the booth, but he resisted, his hand tightening on her arm. You're coming too, right? He asked, anxiously. You won't leave. I'm coming right with you, Sarah assured him. See, I'm sitting right here. She settled Walter into the worn vinyl booth, and Emma climbed in on his other side. Sarah draped the blanket carefully over Walter's shoulders, and he clutched it immediately, pulling it tight around himself. His eyes closed briefly with relief, but even sitting down, Walter kept his hand on Sarah's sleeve, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. The diner's warmth slowly began to work its way into Walter's trembling body. The violent shaking eased, though his stomach kept growling loudly, each sound making him curl forward with pain. Mr. Harrison, what would you like to eat? Sarah asked gently. Walter stared blankly, as if he wasn't sure what eating even meant. His stomach answered for him with another loud growl. It's okay, Sarah soothed. I'll order for you. She caught Joe's eye. Oatmeal toast and some scrambled eggs if you have them. It would take her emergency fund from $17 to $9, pushing her much-needed winter boots even further away, but Walter needed food more than she needed dry feet. When Joe brought the meal, Walter hesitated, confused, until hunger overtook him. He ate desperately, hands shaking so hard Sarah had to steady the spoon. Slowly, she murmured. There's plenty. Beside him, Emma carefully spread jam on pieces of her toast and offered them to him with solemn generosity. The jam makes it taste better, she said. My mama taught me. Walter took the toast with trembling fingers, eyes brightening with tears. You're very kind, little one, like my Benjamin used to be, before I failed him. What's your name? Emma. And that's my mama. She's the best mama in the world. Walter looked at Sarah with something like awe. His hand never left her sleeve. You stayed. You didn't walk past like the others. Why? Sarah's throat tightened. Because you needed help, and because someone would want someone to help my father, if he were alone like this. That's everything, Walter whispered, while he ate, some bites on his own, others with Sarah's help. She called information. 6 listings for Benjamin Harrison. She tried them all. Wrong numbers, disconnected lines. All the while, Walter clung to her sleeve, checking again and again to be sure she hadn't left. On the 4th call, a woman answered, voice taut with fear. Harrison residence. I'm looking for Benjamin Harrison. I have his father here. Walter. He's cold and confused. Oh my God. The woman's voice broke. Where are you? Ben's been searching since yesterday. He has dementia. He wandered away during the shift change. We've been looking everywhere. Please tell me he's okay. He's safe, Sarah said. At Joe's diner on 5th. Cold, hungry, confused, but safe. The woman sobbed with relief. Bless you. Most people don't stop anymore. Sarah returned to the booth. Walter looked up anxiously. You're not leaving, are you? I feel safe with you. I don't feel safe alone. I'm not leaving, Sarah promised. Your son is coming. Benjamin. Walter repeated the name with a broken longing. My boy. Is he still angry? I think he's just worried, Sarah said softly. Walter's eyes filled. I wasn't a good father, always working, building that damn company while Margaret begged me to be present. Then she died, and I still didn't change. Benjamin grew up without either of us. How can I fix what I can't remember? Emma placed her small hand over his. It's okay, People make mistakes. Mama says what matters is if you're sorry and try to be better. Walter sobbed, overcome. But some days I don't even know who I am. Right now, Sarah said gently, you're someone who isn't alone. Let's start there. They sat together as morning light brightened the diner. Walter's hunger eased, but his grip on Sarah's sleeve never loosened, and every few minutes he whispered, you're still here, she always answered. 27 minutes later, a black sedan screeched to a stop. A man burst inside, early 40s, broad-shouldered, exhausted beyond belief. Dad. Walter looked up, and clarity broke across his face like sunlight. Benjamin, I was just telling them about Thunder, the fastest horse in Nebraska. Ben dropped to his knees, cupping his father's face. Yeah, Dad, I remember Thunder. Then he pulled Walter into his arms. Relief and grief shook through him. When he looked up at Sarah, something inside him cracked wide open. You stayed with him, he said hoarsely. He was frightened, Sarah replied. So I stayed. Anyone would've. No, Ben said sharply. No, they wouldn't. I've been searching for 36 hours. Hospitals, police, shelters, every neighborhood. Hired a private investigator. And I found nothing, because no one stops anymore. You did. You fed him, warmed him, gave him dignity. Sarah swallowed. It was just being human. That's everything. Ben whispered, echoing Walter's words. He tried to pay her, but she refused. I'm just glad he's safe. Ben stared at her, her coat held with safety pins, gloves full of holes, worn through shoes, and then at Emma, still holding Walter's hand. He saw the empty plates, the borrowed blanket, the way his father clung to Sarah. Please tell me your name. Sarah Mitchell, and this is Emma. Thank you, Sarah Mitchell, he said quietly, voice breaking. You saw my father when everyone else looked away. My mother would have loved you. Walter's fading clarity flickered once more. He looked at Sarah with sudden strength. Margaret would have liked you. She always stopped to help people. He turned to his son. I was wrong about so many things, Benjamin. Pain flashed across Ben's face. He pressed a business card into Sarah's hand. If you ever need anything, call me. She nodded, though she had no intention of using it. She watched the sedan pull away, Walter's white hair visible through the rear window. Emma squeezed her hand. That was good, Mama. It was just being human, baby, Sarah murmured. But as they walked toward the community center 40 minutes late, Sarah felt something shift quietly inside her, as if the world had tilted a few degrees. Meanwhile, across town in the steel and glass headquarters of Harrison Enterprises, Benjamin Harrison should have been reviewing quarterly reports. Instead, he had spent the morning, and the night before, driving through every corner of Bridgeport, searching for his father with a fear he hadn't felt since childhood. Finding Walter safe in a diner booth, wrapped in a thin plaid blanket, warmed by strangers' kindness, and clinging to the sleeve of a woman who had nothing yet gave everything. Ben knew that moment would live in him forever. If someone had asked Ben 3 years ago what mattered most, he would have answered without hesitation, building the company, proving himself, succeeding where his father had failed. At 25 he took over Harrison Enterprises, dragging it out of the ruin Walter had sunk into after Margaret's death. He rebuilt it ruthlessly, cutting costs, firing without blinking, restructuring until the company became profitable again. By 30 he was a rising star. By 35, Harrison Enterprises was worth triple what it had been under his father. And somewhere in that ascent, Ben became exactly what he'd sworn he wouldn't be: cold, absent, defined by metrics and margins. His marriage collapsed under 70-hour workweeks. He avoided children because he believed he'd never have time to be a real father. He visited Walter in the memory facility only when obligation cornered him, telling himself it didn't matter. Walter wouldn't remember anyway. But 36 frantic hours of imagining his father lost, freezing and possibly dying had cracked something open inside him. Finding Walter safe, warm-fed, cared for by a woman who had nothing yet gave everything, shattered the rest. Driving Walter back to the facility, Ben listened to him hum old songs, speak softly of Thunder and Margaret, and birthday cakes. The old man looked peaceful in a way Ben hadn't seen in years. That woman, Walter said suddenly. Sarah, she reminds me of your mother. Kindness that costs something. Ben swallowed hard. Yeah, Dad, she does. "You're making the same mistakes I made," Walter whispered. "You'll end up just like me, old, confused, full of regrets." In the quiet of the parking lot, his father's words settled like stones. Ben murmured, "I don't know how to be different." "Start by paying attention," Walter said. "Learn from people like her." And over the next days, Ben couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, her worn coat, her quiet dignity, the gentleness with which she treated his father. He found himself driving past Joe's diner just to catch a glimpse of her moving through her morning shift, somehow making minimum wage look like grace. On the third day, he looked up her address in the facility's visitor log. She'd written it down when she called about Walter, and drove to her neighborhood. The building was worse than he'd imagined. Cracked concrete steps, a door that didn't close properly, graffiti on the exterior walls, broken windows on the ground floor, covered with cardboard and tape. He sat in his car for 20 minutes, trying to understand how someone lived here, how Emma grew up here, how Sarah managed to keep going in circumstances that would have broken most people. Then he called a heating repair company he'd used for his properties. "I need someone to fix a furnace today. This afternoon if possible. And I need you to do it properly. Don't bill the tenant. Send the invoice to me personally." The technician who answered sounded puzzled. "Sir, we usually need to schedule appointments at least a week. I'll pay double your emergency rate, triple if you can get someone there this afternoon. Can I ask what address?" Ben gave it, then added, "The tenant is Sarah Mitchell. She's not expecting this. Tell her it's a follow-up from the landlord's maintenance request. Don't mention my name. Just fix it properly and send me the bill." "Yes sir, we can have someone there by 3 o'clock. Ben hung up and sat in his car staring at the building, feeling strange. He'd just spent more on a single furnace repair than many people earned in a month. It was nothing to him, but to Sarah, to Emma, it meant sleeping warm instead of cold. It meant basic comfort instead of suffering. How many other problems in the world could be solved this easily? How much suffering existed simply because people with resources didn't notice people without them? He started the car and drove back to his office, but he couldn't focus on work. The quarterly reports on his desk looked suddenly absurd, pages of numbers quantifying success in ways that had nothing to do with anything that actually mattered. His assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Harrison, you have the department head meeting in 15 minutes. "Cancel it," Ben said. "Sir, cancel it. Reschedule for next week. I need to think." His assistant left looking confused. Ben sat at his desk for another hour, then pulled up the Harrison Enterprises organizational chart. 1,200 employees, 1,200 people whose lives depended on decisions he made. How many of them were like Sarah, working multiple jobs, struggling to get by, doing their best with inadequate resources? He called his head of HR. "I want a comprehensive review of our compensation structure, particularly for entry-level positions. I want to know if any of our employees are working second jobs, and I want recommendations for improving benefits, starting with healthcare coverage." That's going to be a substantial undertaking, sir." "Then get started. I want a preliminary report in 2 weeks." After he hung up, Ben leaned back in his chair and thought about his father's words. "You're making the same mistakes, maybe. But maybe it wasn't too late to make different choices." Saturday morning arrived with weak winter sunlight filtering through clouds. Sarah was on her hands and knees scrubbing the bathroom floor of their apartment, trying to ignore the persistent cold that still seeped through every crack. The landlord had sent someone Friday afternoon surprisingly quickly, and the furnace was working again, but the apartment hadn't fully warmed up yet. Emma sat at the kitchen table drawing pictures with the last of her crayons, worn down to stubs but used carefully, making each one last. The knock on the door was unexpected. Sarah wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole she saw Benjamin Harrison standing in her dingy hallway, looking utterly out of place in his tailored coat and polished shoes. She opened the door a crack. "Mr. Harrison, please call me Ben." He held up his hands, empty, non-threatening. "I know this is strange, but I couldn't stop thinking about you and Emma. About how cold my father was that morning. And I realized, your apartment, your heater was broken, wasn't it? That's why you were both shivering." Sarah's jaw tightened. "The landlord sent someone yesterday. It's fixed now." "I know." Ben's expression was gentle but honest. "I sent them. I'm sorry for not being direct about it. I needed to do something. My father could have died out there if you hadn't stopped. Let me at least make sure you and Emma are warm. Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, but the furnace was working for the first time in 4 days. Emma had slept through the night without shivering. Pride was a luxury Sarah couldn't afford anymore. Thank you, she said quietly, for what you did. Ben nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. My father keeps asking about you and Emma. The facility staff say he's been more agitated than usual, but when I mention your names he calms down. I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider visiting him sometime? I think it would mean a lot to him. Sarah thought about the old man's tears, his regrets about birthday cakes and lost moments. Of course, Emma and I can visit this week. Thank you. Ben pulled out his wallet and extracted several bills. No, Sarah said firmly, recognizing what he was doing. I don't want money, Mr. Harrison. Ben, your father needed help. I helped. That's all. What if it's not for you? What if it's for Emma? New mittens, books, something she needs. Sarah looked at Emma across the room, her daughter drawing with broken crayons, wearing a sweater with holes at the elbows. Every fiber of Sarah's being wanted to refuse. But Emma needed things, and this man was offering help, not charity. There was a difference. Okay, she whispered. But just this once. Ben left 2 20s on the small table by the door and departed before Sarah could change her mind. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Not charity, exactly, but connection. Ben brought Walter to visit every Tuesday and Saturday afternoon. The old man's face lit up when he saw Emma, and he'd spend hours coloring with her at the kitchen table, his shaky hands carefully staying inside the lines like it was the most important work in the world. During these visits, Sarah learned about Ben's life in fragments, about taking over the company at 25, about his divorce, about the years of building success while losing everything else, about his slowly dawning realization that he'd become exactly what he'd resented his father for being. One evening in late March, after Walter had fallen asleep in the armchair, and Emma was reading quietly behind the curtain, Sarah found Ben at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of cold instant coffee. For a moment she simply observed him. The way he sat too straight, as if holding himself together, required conscious effort. The way his hands wouldn't quite stay still. She took the seat across from him. Ben, can I ask you something? He looked up, startled. Yeah? Why Meadowbrook? She asked gently. Why put your father in a facility? You obviously care about him. So, why there? Silence. A long strained silence. Ben closed his eyes, exhaled shakily. I deserve that question. You don't owe me an explanation, Sarah said quietly. But, sometimes saying it out loud helps. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. Then maybe I should say it. He stared at his hands for a long moment. I told myself I put him there because it was the right choice. Because he needed professional care. Because I couldn't keep him safe on my own. Sarah waited. She didn't push. But the truth, his voice cracked. It hurt to watch him slip away. To see him confused. To see him scared. To watch the man who raised me forget who I am. He swallowed hard. I didn't want to face that. And Meadowbrook made it easier not to. Sarah's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. I thought it made me responsible, Ben continued. But really it made me absent. Just like he was with me. That's not the same, Sarah murmured. It feels the same, Ben whispered. Every time I leave him there, it feels like I'm abandoning him all over again. Sarah took a breath, choosing her words. Ben, from the outside, I don't see abandonment. I see a man trying. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not the way you wish you had, but trying. Your father lights up when you walk in. He talks about you constantly. Even when he forgets names, he remembers the feeling. That matters. Ben's voice was barely audible. Is it enough? There's no enough in situations like this, Sarah said gently. There's only what you can do, and you're doing it. You're showing up. Not everyone does. Ben turned to look at Walter asleep in the chair, blanket sliding off one shoulder. He rose quietly, walked over and tucked it around his father again with careful, practiced hands. He's happier here, Ben murmured. With you. With Emma. With familiar things instead of white walls and routines. Maybe, Sarah said softly, because here he isn't a patient, he's just Walter. Someone's father, someone's person. Ben nodded, eyes stinging. I wish I'd done better before it got this far. Before he needed this much help. And I wish I could have kept my mother out of the jobs that broke her health. Sarah replied quietly. But wishing doesn't fix the past. We do what we can now. He looked at her then. Really looked. Not with longing, not with romance, but with the kind of gratitude a person feels when someone finally says the thing they were afraid to hope was true. Thank you, he whispered. You figured that out yourself, Sarah said. I just gave you a place to practice. They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to Walter's gentle snoring and Emma's quiet page-turning, and Ben felt something in his chest loosen slightly. The guilt didn't disappear, it probably never would, but it felt a little more bearable now, a little less suffocating. He was doing the best he could, and maybe, as Sarah said, that was enough. I've been thinking about what Dad said, Ben admitted one Tuesday evening in March. They sat in Sarah's tiny living room, drinking instant coffee from mismatched mugs while Emma and Walter played checkers. About making the same mistakes. I spent 15 years rebuilding the company, proving I was better than him. But I became him. I just did it more efficiently. You're here now, Sarah said gently. That's different from how he was, isn't it? Only because Dad wandered into the snow and you found him. If that hadn't happened, I'd still be in my office, counting money, missing everything that matters. Sarah watched Walter laugh at something Emma said, his whole face lighting up with genuine joy. People can change. It's never too late. Is that what you're doing? Changing your life? Sarah nodded. Trying to. I applied for a position at a tech company here in town, Harrison Tech Solutions. Junior developer role. The interview is next month. If I get it, it would change everything for us. Real salary, benefits. Using my brain for something other than memorizing orders. Ben's expression shifted strangely. Surprise, concern, something else Sarah couldn't identify. Harrison Tech Solutions. Yeah, I know it's a long shot, no degree, no formal experience, but my portfolio is strong. I've taught myself 4 programming languages, built 3 complete applications. I just need someone to give me a chance. Ben was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. You'll do great in that interview, Sarah. I believe in you. What he didn't tell her, what he wrestled with telling her, was that Harrison Tech Solutions was his company, a subsidiary of Harrison Enterprises. He sat with this knowledge like a stone in his chest, torn between wanting to help and respecting her fierce need to succeed on her own merit. He made no calls, sent no emails, pulled no strings. If Sarah got the job, it would be because she earned it. But he did make a mental note to review the hiring policies, to ensure they were truly evaluating candidates on skill rather than arbitrary credentials. That same week, Ben called an emergency meeting with his executive team. They gathered in the main conference room, 8 senior executives who'd been with the company for years, most of them hired during his father's tenure. Richard Blackwood, the CFO, sat at the far end of the table, 62 years old, and counting the days until retirement, with a pension he'd carefully engineered. I want to talk about our community impact, Ben began, standing at the head of the table. What are we doing beyond making profit? Several executives exchanged glances. This wasn't typical agenda material. Richard spoke first, his voice measured and cautious. We donate to the annual United Way campaign. We sponsor a little league team. We provide internships through the community college. Standard corporate citizenship activities. Standard, Ben repeated. Safe. The bare minimum that looks good in annual reports but doesn't actually change anything. With respect, Ben, that's not our job, Richard said, leaning back in his chair. We're a business, not a charity. Our responsibility is to shareholders, to employees, to the bottom line. We do that well, very well. Why complicate it? Because I've been asking myself what we're building here, Ben said. Revenue is up 30% year over year. Profit margins are the best in company history. Stock price is strong. By every metric we use, we're succeeding. But succeeding at what? Making rich people richer, creating shareholder value that never touches the community we operate in. Helen Rodriguez, the head of Harrison Tech Solutions, leaned forward with interest. She was 54, one of the few executives Ben had hired himself, known for valuing people over process. "What are you proposing?" "I don't know yet," Ben admitted. "But I want us to start thinking differently, about how we hire, about how we evaluate talent, about whether the credentials we require actually predict performance, or just exclude people who didn't have advantages." "That's dangerous territory," Richard said, his voice cooling. "Standards exist for a reason. We require degrees because degrees signal commitment, intelligence, follow-through. If we start making exceptions, where does it end? How do we maintain quality? What if the exception performs better than the rule?" Ben challenged. "What if someone without a degree is more talented, more motivated, more valuable than someone with one?" "Then they should have gotten the degree," Richard said flatly. "Those are the standards we've set, standards that have served this company well for 30 years. Ben looked at him, really looked at him, and saw everything he was trying not to become. Richard wasn't evil, he was efficient, practical, operating by rules that made sense in conference rooms but crumbled when confronted with actual human lives. "I want to revisit our hiring requirements," Ben said. "Particularly at Harrison Tech. I want to know if we're screening for credentials or competence. I want to understand if we're missing talent, because we're looking for the wrong signals." "This is about something," Richard said, his eyes narrowing. "What changed? Why now?" Ben thought about his father in the snow, about Sarah's worn gloves and fierce dignity, about Emma sharing toast with a confused stranger, about a whole world of people working 3 times as hard for a fraction of the reward, simply because they'd started from different circumstances. "Nothing changed," Ben said. "I just finally noticed what was always there." The meeting ended with vague commitments to review policies. Richard left looking skeptical and concerned. But Helen stayed behind. "You met someone," she said once they were alone. "What?" "You met someone who made you see things differently. Someone without credentials who's clearly talented. Someone you want to help but can't without compromising the hiring process." Helen smiled slightly. "I've been doing this a long time, Ben." I recognized that look. Ben considered denying it, but decided on honesty. "Her name is Sarah Mitchell. She helped my father. She's brilliant, self-taught programmer, strong portfolio. She applied to Harrison Tech 6 weeks ago. Has an interview scheduled next month. And you haven't interfered." "No, I haven't even looked at her application. Her interview was scheduled before we met. I want her to succeed or fail on her own merit." "But you're changing company policy because of her." "I'm changing policy because it's the right thing to do," Ben said firmly. "She just helped me see that we've been measuring the wrong things." Helen nodded slowly. "I'll review her application when it comes across my desk. If she's as talented as you say, she'll make it on her own." "Thank you, but Ben, be careful. Richard is already suspicious. If he finds out about your connection to a candidate, he'll use it. He's been looking for an excuse to push back on your leadership for months." "Let him try," Ben said. "I'm tired of managing by fear. It's time we started building something better." The Tuesday visits with Walter continued through March and into April. Sarah found herself looking forward to them, not because of Ben, though she'd grown to appreciate his quiet presence, the way he listened more than he talked, but because of Walter himself. In his lucid moments, the old man was funny, wise, heartbreakingly honest about his regrets. He told stories about building Harrison Enterprises from a small construction company into a regional powerhouse, about the deals that almost broke him, about the night Margaret died, and how something inside him had died with her. "I told myself I was working for them," Walter said one afternoon, carefully coloring a picture of a house that Emma had drawn. "For Margaret and Benjamin, securing their future, but really I was hiding from them. Work was easier than intimacy. Success was easier than presence. I could measure work, I could control it, but family, love, those things required vulnerability I didn't know how to access." "You're accessing it now," Sarah said gently. "Look at you with Emma. That's love. This is mercy," Walter corrected, his watery eyes finding hers. "Emma's mercy, yours, Ben's. I don't deserve any of it, but I'm grateful for it every day. I remember to be grateful." Ben, sitting across the small room reviewing something on his laptop, looked up at his father's words. Sarah saw emotion flicker across his face. Grief, yes, but also something like hope. These visits were changing Ben too. Sarah could see it in small ways. He arrived in casual clothes instead of suits. He laughed more easily. He asked questions about Sarah's studying, and seemed genuinely interested in her progress. He brought Emma art supplies, without making a big production of it, just setting them on the table casually, like they'd always been planning to do that. He fixed things too, the dripping faucet, the broken cabinet, the window that wouldn't close properly. Sarah would come home from her shift to find things quietly repaired, a note on the table in Ben's neat handwriting explaining what had been done. She should have felt uncomfortable accepting so much help, but it didn't feel like charity. It felt like friendship. Like what neighbors used to do for each other before everyone got too busy or too isolated or too afraid. One evening in late April, after Walter had fallen asleep in the armchair, and Emma was reading quietly in her bed behind the curtain, Ben helped Sarah wash the dinner dishes at her small sink. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, scrubbing a plate with more attention than necessary. "And I should have told you earlier, but I didn't know how." Sarah's stomach tightened. "What?" "Harrison Tech Solutions. The company you applied to. It's mine. Part of Harrison Enterprises. I've known since you told me about the interview." Sarah set down the cup she was drying, her hands suddenly unsteady. "You knew?" "Yes, but Sarah, I swear to you I haven't interfered. I haven't called Helen Rodriguez. Haven't looked at your application. Haven't done anything except make sure our hiring policies actually evaluate skill instead of just credentials. Your interview was scheduled before we even met. You can verify the application timestamp if you don't believe me. This is yours, entirely yours." Sarah wanted to be angry, wanted to feel betrayed, but she could see the truth in his face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want you to doubt yourself. Didn't want you thinking the interview was manufactured. It's not. You earned it. You'll earn whatever comes next. I didn't want you to carry extra weight into that interview room, wondering if people were judging you differently because we're friends." "Are we?" Sarah asked. "Friends? I hope so," Ben said simply. "My father is happier with you than he's been in years. Emma is one of the kindest kids I've ever met, and you've taught me more about what matters in the past 2 months than I learned in 15 years running a company. So yeah, I hope we're friends." Sarah dried the rest of the dishes in silence, processing this. Finally she said, "Okay, I believe you, and thank you for not interfering, for letting it be mine. You're going to do great in that interview," Ben said with quiet confidence. "Helen's smart. She'll see what I see, that you're exceptional." The day of Sarah's interview arrived with the kind of chaos designed to test a person's resolve. Emma woke at 5:30 vomiting. Sarah cleaned her up, got her settled on the couch with a bucket, checked her temperature, 99.4, elevated but not dangerous. The interview was at 10 o'clock. Mrs. Chen could watch Emma. Everything would be fine, except Mrs. Chen called at 6:15. She'd fallen the night before, twisted her ankle badly, couldn't manage the stairs. Sarah sat on her bathroom floor for exactly 2 minutes, allowing herself that much time to panic, then got up, and made a new plan. She'd take Emma to the community center early. Miss Patricia would understand. Then at 7:30 someone knocked on her door. Sarah opened it to find Walter Harrison standing in the hallway in his pajamas and slippers, his face creased with worry, his eyes unfocused and frightened. He was alone. Completely alone. "Margaret wanted me to get the cake," he said urgently, his hands clutching at the air. "For Benjamin's birthday. He's turning 7, it has to have race cars, red and blue. I can't remember where the bakery is. Do you know where it is? Margaret will be so upset if I forget." Sarah's heart sank. "Mr. Harrison, where's Ben? Does he know you're here?" "Benjamin's at work, always at work, just like I was." Walter's voice cracked. "But I have to get the cake right this time. I have to. Do you understand? I have to get it right." Sarah pulled Walter gently inside, her mind racing. 7:35. The interview was across town. She needed time to drop Emma somewhere, to change into her professional outfit, to review her portfolio one last time, to breathe. She called Ben with shaking hands. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with sleep and then sharp with alarm.
Sarah, what's wrong? Your father's here. At my apartment. He's confused, in his pajamas. I don't know how he got here, or how long he's been wandering. I'm coming. Getting dressed right now. I'll be there in 25 minutes. Ben, I have my interview this morning. At 10. I can't miss it. A pause. I'll be there as fast as I can. Can you? Yes, of course, just hurry. Sarah ended the call and looked at her tiny living room. Emma pale on the couch, with a bucket beside her. Walter agitated and wandering in circles, muttering about a bakery that existed only in the ruins of his memory. 7:38 a.m. Her interview was at 10. Everything she'd built her fragile life upon began to wobble.
But she was Sarah Mitchell. She'd survived worse. She settled Walter with tea and toast, checked Emma's temperature still high but steady. She laid out her interview clothes, reviewed her notes, all while Walter drifted through stories of birthday cakes and business deals and regrets that haunted the apartment like echoes. Ben arrived at 8:15, breathless, shirt buttoned wrong. I'm sorry he hasn't wandered in weeks. They don't know how he got out. I'm so sorry. It's okay, Sarah said, already changing, fingers shaking over the buttons, but I have to leave in 10 minutes. I'll drive you. Dad can come. Emma too. We'll drop you off, then I'll bring them back. You're not missing this. They piled into his car in a rush of blankets and confusion. Walter in the back talking about cakes. Emma bundled beside him, pale but quiet. Sarah clutching her portfolio like oxygen. Traffic was a nightmare. Construction forced a detour. Each red light tightened the panic in her chest. We'll make it, Ben said, cutting through lanes with careful urgency. You'll make it. They reached Harrison Tech Solutions at 9:57. Sarah barely processed the name. She leapt out of the car, shouted a breathless thanks and sprinted inside. The lobby gleamed with glass and steel. Her second-hand blazer suddenly felt indecent, but she lifted her chin and approached the receptionist. Sarah Mitchell, interview at 10. Third floor. Good luck. Helen Rodriguez, mid-50s, warm-eyed behind elegant glasses, greeted her in a bright conference room overlooking the city. Walk me through this application, she said, tapping Sarah's portfolio on the screen. Tell me your process. So Sarah did. She explained her code, her logic, her interface design. She spoke of teaching herself in library aisles, of late nights, of building something that mattered. Her nervousness dissolved into purpose. They moved through technical questions, frameworks, debugging strategies, time folded around them. Finally Helen leaned back, thoughtful. I was skeptical at first, no degree, no formal training. But this, she gestured at the screen, is extraordinary. You did all of this on your own. Yes, ma'am, Sarah whispered. 18 months. While working 2 jobs and raising a daughter. Helen nodded slowly. I'm recommending you for the position. We still have other interviews, but you're the front runner. Expect a call within a week. Sarah left the building floating. Then halfway down the block she turned back, and saw the sign clearly. Harrison Tech Solutions, a subsidiary of Harrison Enterprises, Ben's company. Her stomach dropped. She called him immediately. Did you know? Sarah, did you know this was your company when I told you about my interview? Silence. Traffic noise. Emma's faint voice. Walter humming. Then yes. I knew. Her breath caught. Did you do anything? Pull strings? Talk to anyone? No. His voice was steady, unshaken. I didn't know you'd applied until you told me. I never called Helen. Never looked at your file. Your interview was scheduled before we met. You can check the timestamps. HR can send them. This was yours. How do I know that? Because you know me, he said quietly. Because you know I wouldn't cheapen something you worked this hard for. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, people brushing past her, the cold wind cutting through her blazer. She'd spent her whole life fighting for scraps. The idea that something genuinely earned might be hers, it felt unreal, almost frightening. Okay, she whispered at last. I believe you. A pause. Then you did great in there, didn't you? Sarah felt a smile rise slowly, unbelievably. I think I actually did. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Genuinely proud. You barely know me. I know enough, he said, and for the first time in a long time she let herself believe him. The call came 6 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah got the job. Helen Rodriguez herself, warm and professional, offering a junior developer position with a starting salary of $48,000 a year, more money than Sarah had ever made, plus benefits that included healthcare for both Sarah and Emma. Starting date in 2 weeks. Sarah cried when she hung up. Great gulping sobs of relief and joy and disbelief. Emma, confused but happy, hugged her tight. "Are we going to be okay now, Mama?" "Yeah, baby, we're going to be okay." Those 2 weeks passed in a blur. Sarah gave notice at both jobs. Joe at the diner hugged her, genuinely happy. She started apartment hunting, looking for something better, somewhere with heat that actually worked and maybe a real bedroom for Emma. She bought Emma new shoes that fit properly. She bought herself clothes for the new job. She felt like she was building something real, something solid, something that couldn't be taken away. Then on the night before her first day, everything went wrong. Emma woke at 2 in the morning struggling to breathe. Sarah knew immediately this was serious. Emma's lips had a bluish tint. Her chest heaved with effort, each breath a rattling wheeze. Her fever was 103.8. Sarah called 911 with fingers that wouldn't quite work right, then wrapped Emma in a blanket and met the ambulance downstairs. The ride to County General Hospital was a nightmare of sirens and fear, and Emma's labored breathing filling the small space. The ER doctor took one look and ordered immediate admission. Pneumonia, severe, both lungs. They put Emma on oxygen, started IV antibiotics, moved her to the pediatric ICU because her oxygen saturation was dangerously low. Sarah sat beside the hospital bed, holding Emma's small hand, watching monitors beep and flash, and felt the world narrow to this moment, this room, this fight for her daughter's life. Nothing else mattered, not the new job, not the better apartment, not any of it. She called Ben at 3 in the morning because she didn't know who else to call. She had no family, no close friends. Ben was the only person who might actually care. He answered on the second ring. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Emma's in the hospital, pediatric ICU. Pneumonia." "It's bad, Ben. It's really bad and I can't." "Which hospital?" "County General." "I'm on my way." 20 minutes. He showed up in 22. Sarah counted everyone, with coffee in a thermos and a blanket from his car, and a calm presence that Sarah desperately needed. He didn't try to fix anything, or say it would be okay, or offer platitudes. He just sat with her in the horrible plastic chair and let her cry into his shoulder while machines beeped their mechanical rhythms. When morning came and Sarah needed to make calls to Helen about her start date, to Emma's school, to the landlord about rent, Ben handled everything. He called Helen and explained the situation. He called the school. He called Sarah's landlord and paid the next month's rent before Sarah could stop him. You can't. Sarah started. "It's done," Ben said firmly. "You can pay me back later if you want. Right now you need to focus on Emma, that's all." For 3 days Emma fought. The fever spiked to 104, then higher. Doctors added stronger antibiotics. They talked about ventilators in serious voices. Sarah didn't sleep, couldn't eat, just sat beside the bed willing her daughter to breathe, to fight, to stay. Ben came every day, bringing food Sarah barely touched, sitting with Emma when Sarah needed to shower. He read to Emma when she was awake, talked to her when she was asleep, telling her about his office and birds outside his window and how excited everyone was to meet her mama when she started her new job. Walter came too. On the 3rd day, during one of his lucid periods, Ben brought him and the old man sat beside Emma's bed, held her hand with his trembling one, told her stories about being sick with scarlet fever when he was a boy, about how his mother had read to him and promised he'd get better. Emma opened her eyes, heavy with fever and medication, and smiled weakly. "You're my friend," she whispered. "You're mine too, little one," Walter said gently, tears running down his weathered face. "You fight. You hear me? You fight like your mama fights. You're strong." On the 4th day, Emma turned a corner. Her fever broke at dawn. Her breathing eased. The oxygen saturation numbers crept upward. The doctor said she could probably go home in 2 or 3 more days if this improvement continued. Sarah cried from relief, great shaking sobs that left her exhausted and empty and grateful. That's when the hospital billing administrator came to see her. The woman was thin and professionally sympathetic, carrying a tablet. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Janet from billing. I wanted to review your insurance coverage and anticipated costs for Emma's stay." Sarah's insurance from the diner was minimal. She'd been meaning to ask about insurance at the new job, but she hadn't even started yet. She nodded, bracing herself. Janet went through the numbers with gentle efficiency. Room charges for the pediatric ICU, IV medications, specialist consultations, radiology, laboratory work. Even with insurance paying their portion, Sarah's responsibility came to $8,743. $8,743. Sarah had $632 in savings. The deposit for the better apartment, $500 saved over 7 months, was sitting in a coffee can under her bed. Her first paycheck wouldn't come for 3 weeks, and even then it wouldn't be enough. "Do you have payment arrangements available?" Sarah asked, her voice hollow. "Of course, we can set up a payment plan." Janet's voice was genuinely kind. "For this amount we typically arrange monthly payments of approximately $400. 24 months, $400 a month for 2 years. On top of rent and food and utilities." Sarah did the math. After taxes and expenses, she'd have maybe $300 left each month. The payment plan would eat all of that and then some. She'd have to keep night cleaning jobs. She'd be right back where she started, working herself to death just to stay afloat, never actually getting ahead. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "Can I have a few days to figure out the first payment?" "Of course, take your time." After Janet left, Sarah sat in the hospital chapel and cried. She cried for Emma, who'd almost died and didn't deserve to be the reason their lives fell apart financially. She cried for herself, for exhaustion that never ended, for hope that kept getting dangled and then snatched away. Ben found her there an hour later. He sat beside her in the quiet space, not speaking, just present. Finally he asked gently, "The hospital bills?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "Let me help, please." "No." The word came out fierce, desperate. "No, Ben. I can't. I can't be someone who takes money. I can't be that person." "Sarah, no. Listen to me." She turned to face him, eyes red and swollen. "I've worked my whole life to stand on my own 2 feet, to not need anyone. If I take your money now, if I let you pay these bills, what does that make me? What does that say about everything I've worked for?" "It makes you human," Ben said quietly, firmly. "It makes you someone who loves her daughter more than her pride. Someone who's been dealt a raw hand by a system designed to crush people like you. Someone who deserves help from someone who cares." "I don't want to be rescued," Sarah said, her hands clenched. "I want to rescue myself. I need to rescue myself." Ben was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I told you there's a difference between being rescued and being supported?" Sarah waited. "Being rescued," Ben continued, "means someone fixes your problems for you. You become dependent. You lose agency. Being supported means someone stands beside you while you fix your own problems. You're still doing the work, but you don't have to do it alone." He took her hand gently. "You supported my father when you had every reason not to. You supported me, showed me parts of family and kindness I'd forgotten. You didn't rescue me from being a bad son. You stood beside me while I tried to do better. Let me do the same for you. Not as charity, as what people do when they care." Sarah sat with that, thinking of her pride, her fierce independence, her mother who refused help and died exhausted, and Emma, pale in a hospital bed. The difference between being alone and being connected. "Okay," she whispered. "But as alone, I'll pay you back. We'll figure it out later," Ben said. "For now let's get Emma home and healthy." What Sarah didn't know was that during those 3 hospital days, Ben had been thinking deeply about systems that crushed people like her, about how many hard-working lives were one emergency from collapse, about how easily things could change if people with resources cared enough. He reviewed Harrison Enterprises' benefits and was disgusted. Adequate for executives, nearly useless for hourly workers. Sick leave stingy, parental leave non-existent. On paper competitive, in reality, most employees were one illness from bankruptcy. The morning Emma's fever broke, Ben called an emergency meeting. "I want to overhaul our entire benefits package," he announced. "Healthcare, sick leave, parental leave. Entry-level employees get the same coverage as executives. Real emergency protection. Real sick leave, that will cost millions." Richard Blackwood snapped. "We're a business, not a charity. It's an investment in our people," Ben said.
Healthy employees work better, or we hire people who already have health care. Richard countered, we're not responsible for fixing society, we're part of society, Ben said sharply, and we are responsible for our employees' well-being. This is happening. Richard glared, I oppose this. I'll prepare the cost analysis, but I think it's reckless. Noted, Ben said. After the others left, Helen stayed behind. You're making enemies, I'm making changes, Ben replied. If that makes enemies, so be it. She studied him. Ben smiled softly. Your father would be proud, the man he became at the end, not the one who built the company. That's the man I'm trying to be, Ben said quietly. It just took me a long time to understand the difference. Emma recovered slowly but steadily. After 6 days in the hospital, she came home with medications and breathing treatments, and Sarah spent a week watching her daughter breathe, as if each inhale were a prayer. When June arrived, Sarah finally stepped into her new role at Harrison Tech Solutions. The job was everything Helen had promised: challenging work, supportive colleagues, and a boss who valued results more than credentials. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah wasn't bone-tired every waking moment. She worked reasonable hours, came home with energy to spare, and in mid-July she moved Emma into a warm, safe apartment with a real bedroom. For a brief, fragile moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel something like happiness. That was when Richard Blackwood decided she didn't belong. Richard, high CFO of Harrison Enterprises for 23 years, had built his reputation on corporate standards, degrees, pedigree, predictability. When he spotted Sarah's name on the quarterly payroll, curiosity turned into scrutiny. No degree, no certifications, no prior tech experience, yet hired at a competitive salary and connected socially to the CEO. To him she represented everything wrong with the modern workforce. Diluted standards dressed up as compassion. Worse, her success threatened the foundation of his beliefs. If someone like Sarah proved exceptional, then years of rigid hiring practices and Richard's authority were suddenly questionable. He waited until the September executive meeting to strike. This Mitchell woman, he began, projecting Sarah's file on the screen, was hired at a senior junior developer salary with no relevant qualifications. I recommend immediate termination. Ben, sitting at the head of the table, went very still. On what grounds? Failure to meet basic job requirements. She spent 8 years waiting tables. She's a liability and an embarrassment. Ben's reply was cold and sharp. She is one of the most talented developers Helen has ever worked with. Her code is exceptional. Her performance exceeds every metric. She mentors others. Under no definition is she a liability. That's not the point, Richard insisted. The point is precedent. If we abandon standards, where does it stop? The standard, Ben said, is competence. Then Richard played his final card. You're emotionally involved. You visit her apartment. You paid her bills. This isn't business, it's personal, and it compromises the integrity of the company. Silence fell. Ben's jaw hardened. Sarah Mitchell was hired before I met her. She earned that job. You will not target her because she doesn't fit your narrow view of worth. The vote that followed was close. 4 against termination, 3 in favor. Richard left with a look that promised this wasn't over. After the meeting, Helen lingered. He'll push again. Be careful, Ben. Your relationship with Sarah, whatever it is, gives him ammunition. It's my father's relationship with her, Ben replied. She makes him calmer, that's all. Is it? Helen asked quietly. Ben said nothing, but later that night, doubt crept in, and he called Sarah to meet for coffee the next morning. When he told her about the meeting, she went pale, withdrawing into herself. So they think I don't belong, she said flatly. Richard thinks that, not the rest of us. Maybe he's right, Sarah whispered. Maybe I'm in over my head. Maybe I should leave before. Stop. Ben's voice cut through her panic. Don't give him that power. Don't let one bitter man undo everything you've built. She looked at him, eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. How do I know I earned this? Because Helen hired you. Because your team loves working with you. Because your code speaks for itself. Because you're good at this, Sarah, objectively, undeniably good. Still, she whispered, people will always wonder. Then prove them wrong, Ben said. Not for me, for yourself. And she did. For the next 3 months, Sarah worked with quiet intensity. She volunteered for the hardest projects, fixed long-ignored problems, redesigned interfaces, streamlined processes, mentored junior developers. Piece by piece, the whispers dissolved. Her results were too strong to ignore. People stopped seeing her as Ben Harrison's charity case. They started seeing her as Sarah Mitchell, sharp, capable, indispensable. But Richard wasn't finished. No, he was waiting, watching, gathering ammunition. And the moment he found something he could weaponize, he would strike with precision. Because for Richard, this wasn't about Sarah anymore. It was about control, about the future of the company, and about proving at any cost that people like Sarah Mitchell should never have been allowed through the door. Walter's condition deteriorated rapidly that autumn. The dementia that had been progressively worsening became severe. The peaceful, gentle confusion gave way to agitation, sometimes aggression. He didn't recognize Ben some days. He called the facility staff by his dead wife's name. He accused them of stealing, of lying, of trying to hurt him. The facility called Ben 4 times in 1 week. They were reaching their limits. They suggested a specialized memory care unit with locked doors and sedation protocols. Ben couldn't bring himself to do it. Not yet. Not while his father still had moments of clarity, brief windows when he came back to himself. Sarah visited Walter as often as she could, bringing Emma when it seemed like he was having a good day. The old man still recognized them more often than not, still smiled when they walked in, still asked Emma about her drawings in school. But the lucid moments grew fewer, like stars visible through gathering clouds. One evening in late October, Sarah arrived to find Walter sitting alone in the facility's common room, tears streaming down his face, hands shaking in his lap. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it, just staring at nothing, crying silently. She sat beside him, taking his trembling hand gently. "Mr. Harrison, what's wrong? I ruined everything," Walter whispered, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the fog of dementia. "I built an empire, and lost my family, lost Margaret, lost those years with Benjamin, lost myself chasing success, and now I'm losing even my memories. Soon I won't remember what I did wrong. I won't remember anything at all." "You didn't lose Ben," Sarah said softly. "He's here. He visits almost every day. He loves you. He loves the father he wished he'd had," Walter murmured, eyes startlingly clear. "Not the man I was, absent, cold, always choosing board meetings over bedtime stories. I told myself I was providing for them, but really I was hiding." "He doesn't hate you," Sarah said firmly. "He's still learning from you. What could an old fool like me teach anyone now?" Emma, coloring quietly nearby, looked up with solemn 7-year-old wisdom. "That it's never too late to be kind," she said. "Mama says you're kind now. That's what matters." Walter stared at her in wonder, then at Sarah, peace slowly settling across his worn features. "You're raising a wise child. She learns from the people around her," Sarah whispered. "From people like you." That evening, during one of his rare moments of full lucidity, Walter asked Ben to take him to Sarah's apartment. Ben called ahead, and Sarah agreed despite the hour. Walter sat at Emma's small table, drawing pictures, telling stories of Nebraska, horses and his mother's apple pies. Then he looked at Sarah and Ben with a clarity that made the room still. "I want to do something meaningful," he said. "Before I forget again." "What is it?" Sarah asked gently. "A trust fund," Walter said. "Your mother and I set it up for you, Benjamin, before you were born. You never needed it. It's been growing for 40 years. I want it for Emma, her education. And I want Sarah to receive the income from it until Emma turns 18. Not wealth, just safety. Enough so she never has to choose between heat and food again." Ben was stunned. "Dad, that's substantial. Maybe we should." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Walter said, suddenly strong. "This trust is mine, not part of your inheritance. Mine." And Sarah, he took her hands in both of his. "This isn't charity. It's an investment. In you, in Emma, in the kind of future I should have built. You gave me something I can never repay. Family, peace, a reason to be better, even at the end." Sarah tried to refuse, but Walter stopped her with a look. "Don't rob me of the one good thing I can still do, please." So she accepted. Ben prepared the papers, had them notarized. The trust would cover Sarah's basic expenses and pay for Emma's education. Not luxury, just stability, the kind of safety net Sarah had never known. That night, after they left, she wept with gratitude and disbelief.
10 days later, Meadowbrook called Ben at 6 in the morning. Walter had developed pneumonia. His condition was deteriorating rapidly. The doctor gave him days, maybe a week at most. Ben was in his car within 15 minutes. When he arrived at the facility, his father was in bed, oxygen mask over his face, breathing labored and shallow. But his eyes were open, and they found Ben immediately. "Benjamin," Walter whispered, his voice barely audible through the mask. "I'm here, Dad." Ben pulled a chair close to the bed, took his father's hand. "I'm right here." The doctor pulled Ben aside. "We can keep him comfortable here, or if you prefer you can take him home. At this stage it's about quality of time, not quantity." Home. Ben thought about his sterile condo, about hospital beds and nursing care and all the logistics of dying. Then he thought about Sarah's words. Just be present. That's all he needs. Can I bring him somewhere else? Somewhere he'd be happy. The doctor hesitated. With portable oxygen and medication, yes. But he needs someone with him constantly. He'll have that, Ben said. "I'll be with him." He called Sarah from the hallway, his voice shaking. "Dad's dying. Pneumonia. They're saying days." "I know this is asking too much, but bring him here," Sarah said immediately. "To our apartment. Let him be with people who love him." "Sarah, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Bring him home, Ben. Let him have peace." 2 hours later, with help from the facility staff, they moved Walter to Sarah's small apartment. They set up the hospital bed in the living area, near the window where afternoon light came through. Emma helped arrange Walter's photos on the dresser beside him. Sarah borrowed extra blankets from Mrs. Chen. It wasn't much, but it was warm. It was filled with life, and Walter, even through his labored breathing, seemed to relax. Ben called his assistant. "Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks. Cancel everything. Board meetings, client calls, all of it." "Sir, the quarterly review is in 3 days." "I said cancel everything," Ben said firmly. "My father is dying. Nothing else matters right now." For 6 days Ben lived in Sarah's apartment. He slept on the couch. He sat beside his father's bed for hours, holding his hand, reading to him, talking about memories both recent and distant. Sarah brought meals. Emma drew pictures and taped them to the wall where Walter could see them. Friends from the community dropped by quietly. Joe from the diner, Mrs. Chen, Miss Patricia from the community center, people who'd heard about the kind old man who colored with Emma. Walter drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he knew where he was. Other times he thought he was on the farm in Nebraska, or at his wedding, or watching Benjamin take his first steps. But in his lucid moments, he was at peace. "You came back," he whispered to Ben on the 3rd day. "You didn't choose work." "No, Dad, I chose you. I'm sorry it took me so long." "You learned faster than I did," Walter said, managing a weak smile. "That's something." Emma spent hours beside Walter's bed, showing him drawings, telling him about school, talking even when he couldn't answer. She seemed to understand with the quiet wisdom children sometimes have. That presence itself was a gift. On the 5th day, Walter had a moment of perfect clarity. He looked around the small apartment, at Emma sleeping in her corner, at Sarah making tea, at Ben holding his hand, and tears slid down his weathered face. "This is what I should have built," he whispered. "Not an empire. This connection, family, love." He squeezed Ben's hand. "You figured it out, Benjamin. You built what I couldn't. You taught me, Dad," Ben said softly. "At the end you taught me everything." Walter smiled. Better late than never. That night Sarah woke Ben at 3 a.m. Walter's breathing had changed, slower, uneven. Ben moved to his bedside. Walter's eyes fluttered open and found his son. "Margaret," he whispered. "She's waiting for you, Dad," Ben said, voice breaking. "It's okay to go to her now." Walter smiled, a pure, relieved smile. "The birthday cake. Tell her I'm sorry. She knows, and she forgives you, just like I do." Walter squeezed Ben's hand one last time. "Love you, my boy. So proud of who you became." "I love you too, Dad." Walter Harrison took 3 more breaths. Then, surrounded by warmth, drawings on the walls, and the people who loved him, he let go. The room fell silent except for Emma's soft crying and Sarah's quiet sobs as she held Ben while he wept over his father's body. Ben stayed there a long time, holding Walter's cooling hand, thinking about birthday cakes, race cars, all the years they'd lost, and the few precious moments they'd found at the end. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah, "for giving him this, for letting him die, surrounded by love instead of alone. He was family," Sarah said simply. "This is what you do for family." Ben realized then that family wasn't just blood, it was choosing to show up even when it was hard. The funeral was large, CEOs, colleagues, dignitaries, but what stayed with Ben was the small memorial Sarah held later. Emma read a poem, Joe shared stories from the diner, Mrs. Chen spoke of the gentle man who reminded her of his wife. They had known Walter at his best, not the titan, not the grieving widower, but the broken man who'd finally learned how to accept love. "He saved my life," Sarah said softly. "Not the morning I found him in the snow. Every morning after, he reminded me that kindness matters, that connection matters, that it's never too late to choose love." Ben felt his father's presence like a blessing. Walter had spent most of his life building the wrong things, but at the end, in a tiny apartment with borrowed blankets and crayon drawings, he'd built something that would last, a legacy of love. Later, Ben and Sarah stood by a window overlooking the cemetery. "Thank you," Ben said. He was at peace. Sarah replied, "That's what matters." Ben nodded, then shared Walter's final lucid words. "He told me that woman saved my life. Not the morning she found me, every morning after. She saw me instead of the disease. She reminded me life was still worth living." Ben's voice broke. "Don't let her face the world alone," he said. "She's strong, but strong doesn't mean she should have to be alone." Sarah covered her mouth, tears spilling. "I didn't save him." "Yes, you did," Ben whispered, "and he saved both of us." Walter's death was an ending, but it was also the beginning of who Ben and Sarah were becoming. For Ben, that meant facing the kind of leader he wanted to be. His father had spent years building success and ending up alone. Only at the end did he understand what mattered. Ben wasn't going to repeat that mistake. He completed the benefits overhaul Richard had opposed: real healthcare for all employees, real sick leave, parental leave, mental health support. It cost millions. It was worth it. He began attending team meetings at Harrison Tech, not to supervise but to listen. He watched how Sarah worked, how she built people, not just code. She guided junior developers with patience, asked questions that made others think, created an environment where learning mattered more than pretending to know. "How did you learn to lead like this?" Ben asked one evening. "I'm not leading," Sarah said, genuinely puzzled. "I just remember what it felt like to be lost and want someone to believe in me, so I try to be that person." That, Ben said quietly, is leadership. The best kind. It sparked an idea in him, something that would one day become the Community Technology Center. But first he needed the company stable enough to support it. And he needed to confront Richard, whose hostility was growing with every change Ben made. The fight ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in his life, Ben knew exactly what he was fighting for. Spring arrived with a sense of renewal. Sarah had been at Harrison Tech Solutions for nearly a year, and her role had grown far beyond writing code. She was leading projects now, mentoring junior developers, contributing to strategic discussions. And she had an idea, one that had been forming since those early days in the library, since watching Emma play with Walter, since realizing how much untapped talent existed in people who simply lacked opportunity. She spent 3 weeks crafting a detailed proposal. She researched similar programs, studied outcomes, built financial models, and designed measurable metrics. She assembled everything with the same rigor she'd used when building her original programming portfolio. Then she requested a meeting with Helen Rodriguez. On a Tuesday afternoon, Sarah sat in Helen's office, professionally bound proposals stacked in her hands. They shook slightly as she passed one across the desk, but her voice was steady. "I want to start a program," she said. "Community technology training. For people from underserved areas, people like me. We teach real skills, real coding, real pathways into tech careers." "Like a coding boot camp?" Helen asked. "More comprehensive." Sarah flipped open the proposal. "A community hub, free classes at multiple levels, computers and internet access provided, job placement support,
Partnerships with local employers. We remove every barrier we can. She walked Helen through the research, budget, curriculum, and partnerships she'd mapped out. She'd surveyed community members, spoken with non-profits, and built the proposal around actual needs. Helen listened carefully. When Sarah finished, she said, "This is impressive, but expensive. I can't approve something of this scale. It needs Ben's support, and likely the foundation board's." Sarah had hoped for more autonomy, but she nodded. "I wanted your feedback first." "You have my full support," Helen said, "but Richard Blackwood will fight this. He'll call it charity, waste, favoritism." "Then maybe I shouldn't propose it," Sarah murmured. "Maybe someone else." "No," Helen said sharply. "This is your vision. Your experience makes you the right person to lead it. Don't hide because Richard is threatened by change." Over the next 2 weeks, Helen coached her through corporate politics. They refined the proposal, mapped out allies, and anticipated objections. Then Helen arranged something unexpected, a direct presentation to Ben. "He needs to hear it from you," Helen said. On Friday afternoon, Sarah arrived at Ben's office with her materials. He greeted her warmly and invited her to sit by the window. "Helen says you have something to share," he said. "I'm intrigued." Sarah began her presentation, walking him through every component: research, curriculum, financial projections, community partnerships. Ben listened with real engagement, asking thoughtful questions. When she finished, he was silent for a moment. "Then this would be expensive, around $250,000 for setup." "Yes, but we could start smaller." "No," he said. "If we do this, we do it right. But you need to understand, Richard will fight it. He'll accuse me of favoritism." "Are you ready for that?" "Helen warned me," Sarah said. "But this isn't about me. It's about people who need a chance." Ben smiled faintly. "Good. Here's what I'm thinking. The foundation can fund a 6-month pilot. 1 location, 50 students. We measure everything: completion rates, job placement, retention. If it works, we scale." Sarah's breath caught. "You'd actually fund this?" "I'll fund a pilot," Ben said, "if you lead it, but it will make you more visible. Richard won't like that." "Can you handle it?" "I've been handling it for 8 months," Sarah said. "I'll keep proving them wrong." "Then let's build something that matters," Ben said, shaking her hand. The next 6 months were grueling. Sarah found a rundown community center on the south side of Bridgeport, much like her old neighborhood, and they transformed it with donated materials and volunteer labor. They installed 30 computers, licensed software, and the high-speed internet Harrison Tech provided. They hired instructors from within the community, but nothing went perfectly. By month 2, renovation costs had exceeded estimates by 20%. Sarah had to ask Ben for additional funding, painful, knowing Richard was tracking every overrun. By month 3, 2 instructors didn't work out. One couldn't connect with students, the other couldn't teach effectively. Sarah had to let them go and start over. By month 4, the curriculum she'd built, after countless late nights, proved too advanced. 40% of the pilot students dropped out within 2 weeks. She had to redesign everything, add foundational content, and delay opening by 6 weeks. She questioned herself constantly. Was she the right person to lead this? Was she in over her head? Ben stayed steady. "Every new initiative has problems," he told her. "The fact that you're fixing them means you're doing it right." Helen was practical. "Think like a developer. Version 1 just needs to work well enough to iterate." By September, 6 months after they began, the center was ready. Sarah insisted it not carry the Harrison name. This wasn't about Ben or the company. It was about community, about opportunity. They called it the Bridgeport Community Technology Center. They planned a soft opening for a Saturday morning in early October, expecting maybe 30 or 40 people. 317 showed up. They lined the block starting at dawn. Teenagers, parents, retirees, people hungry for a chance. People who had heard through community networks and word of mouth, and the flyers Sarah had taped in laundromats. Standing at the entrance, greeting them, Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. This was the true legacy of Walter's gift. Not the money, but the ability to lift others, the way she'd been lifted. Emma, now 8 and brimming with confidence, cut the ribbon with oversized scissors. "Welcome to your future," she shouted as the crowd cheered. In the back, Ben watched Sarah, watching her shine with purpose and certainty, and felt a pride he hadn't known in years. Not pride in himself or in his company, but in what they had built together, in what Sarah was creating. Richard Blackwood showed up 2 days after the opening. He walked through the center with a sour expression, his assistant trailing behind taking notes, noting every expense, every detail, every potential criticism. Afterward, he cornered Ben in the parking lot. "This is exactly the kind of waste I've been warning about," Richard said, his voice cold and certain. "Feel-good initiatives that don't provide measurable returns. You're throwing foundation money away on a vanity project. The foundation exists to serve the community," Ben said evenly. "This serves the community. This serves her," Richard said, nodding toward Sarah through the center's windows, where she was working with a group of students. "Your girlfriend, your project. You've turned this company and its foundation into her personal playground. You're compromising everything we've built because you're infatuated with someone who doesn't belong in our world." "Sarah Mitchell is not my girlfriend," Ben said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "She's a colleague, a friend, and a visionary who's doing more good with this program than you've done in your entire career, counting pennies and cutting opportunities. We'll see what the board thinks at the next quarterly review," Richard said, smiling thinly. "I'm calling for a full review of foundation expenditures and oversight. This program, your relationship with Mitchell, all of it. You've compromised this company's integrity, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." After Richard left, Sarah came outside. She'd heard enough through the open door. "He's coming after me again." "He's coming after both of us," Ben corrected. "Let him come, we'll be ready." But privately, Ben knew this was going to be the fight that determined everything. Richard had been building his case for months. He had allies on the board who were worried about the foundation's spending, about Ben's leadership, about whether the company was straying too far from its core mission. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for late November. Ben spent the intervening weeks preparing, working with Helen and the Foundation's legal counsel to document everything. The outcomes from the tech center, Sarah's performance reviews, the clean separation between personal and professional decisions. But he also knew that documentation wouldn't be enough. Richard wasn't just attacking the program or Sarah's position. He was attacking Ben's judgment, his priorities, his fitness for leadership. This wasn't about spreadsheets. It was about vision, two completely different philosophies about what a company should be and what it should value. And Ben knew that if he won this fight, if he could convince the board to support this new direction, it would transform not just the foundation but the entire company. It would prove that success and compassion weren't mutually exclusive, that profit and purpose could coexist. But if he lost, Richard would use it to push him out, and everything, the tech center, Sarah's position, the cultural shift Ben was trying to create would be dismantled. The stakes had never been higher, and Ben had never been more certain that this was a fight worth having. The board meeting was set for a Friday afternoon in late November. Richard had called a special session, circulating a 42-page memo titled "Concerning Patterns of Nepotism, Financial Mismanagement, and Compromised Leadership at Harrison Enterprises and Affiliated Organizations." The memo was exhaustive and devastating. It cataloged every interaction between Ben and Sarah, every dollar spent on the Community Technology Center, every decision that could be twisted into personal bias. It questioned Ben's judgment, priorities and fitness for leadership. Richard had collected employee complaints, highlighted a 40% increase in foundation spending, and framed Ben's benefits overhaul as reckless excess. He even quoted outside board members warning of the dangers of mixing personal relationships with corporate governance. Ben spent the week preparing his defense with Helen and legal counsel, assembling data on the tech center's outcomes, Sarah's performance, and the positive cultural shifts under his leadership. But he knew documentation wasn't the heart of this fight. This was about philosophy, about what Harrison Enterprises should stand for. The night before the meeting, Sarah appeared in his doorway. She hadn't been invited. Richard had ensured that, but she'd seen the memo. "I should resign," she said. "If I step down, Richard loses his ammunition. You keep the company. This is all happening because of me." "No," Ben said. "It's happening because Richard is threatened by change. If you resign, you confirm everything he believes. Credentials over competence, tradition over innovation, exclusion over access. But you could lose the company, she whispered. Ben came around his desk. My father built a company and lost his family. He told me not to make the same mistake. If I must choose between keeping Harrison Enterprises and betraying what I've learned this year, there's no choice. I'd rather lose the company doing the right thing. Sarah stared at him, shaken. Then let me stand with you. I want to be there tomorrow. It's a closed session, Ben said. Richard structured it that way, then change it. You're the CEO. Invite me as a relevant stakeholder. Ben hesitated, then nodded. I'll notify the board. Richard will object, but he can live with it. She exhaled. Thank you for fighting for this. Thank you, he said softly, for showing me what's worth fighting for. The boardroom the next day was imposing. Dark wood, leather chairs, portraits of past leaders watching from the walls. 12 board members sat around the table. Richard stood ready with his presentation, looking righteous. Sarah sat beside Ben, laptop open, hands steady despite the fear beneath. Richard began with brutal precision. He cited the tech center's cost, over $312,000, called Sarah unqualified, portrayed the program as underperforming, and accused Ben of allowing personal entanglements to cloud his judgment. His conclusion was blunt: suspend funding, review all foundation activity, and terminate Sarah Mitchell. Silence followed. Ben spoke. Before we consider these recommendations, I've invited Miss Mitchell to present the program's outcomes. Richard flushed. This is irregular. As CEO, I may invite relevant stakeholders. Ben said. Miss Mitchell is the program director. Sarah stood and connected her laptop. Mr. Blackwood showed you expenses, she said, but not impact. Her first slide showed a smiling woman in front of a computer. This is Maria Rodriguez. 3 years unemployed, 2 kids, no degree. She finished our program and now works as a junior developer earning $42,000 a year. Her kids have health insurance for the first time. She clicked again. James Chen, former construction worker. Injury ended his career. He finished our program and works at Web Design Partners, earning enough to live independently. One by one she presented faces and stories. 12 people now employed, 12 families changed. We have 43 students enrolled, Sarah continued. At our current trajectory, we expect 25 more placements in the next 6 months. She shifted slides. As for qualifications, Mr. Blackwood is right. I don't have a degree. What I have is this. She showed her work at Harrison Tech, applications built, projects led, performance reviews, emails from developers asking to work with her. I learned through determination. I exceeded expectations. And I know what it means to fight for a chance. That makes me the right person to run this program. 3 years ago, I was one of these people. Someone gave me a chance. Now I'm giving others a chance. Her final slide showed Emma cutting the ribbon on opening day. This is what your money buys, Sarah said quietly. Opportunity, transformation. For individuals, families, communities. Walter Harrison understood that. He believed that wealth without connection is poverty. This program creates connection. Vote to shut it down if you want, but know what you're choosing. She sat, pulse pounding. Silence again, until Margaret Chen finally leaned forward. 12 placements in 3 months is impressive. What's your methodology? Sarah walked them through the data. More questions followed, serious ones. The board wasn't dismissing her, they were engaging. Richard tried repeatedly to pull the conversation back to cost. It didn't work. The attention had shifted. David Morrison finally addressed him. You call this financial mismanagement, but the foundation exists for community benefit. Miss Mitchell has demonstrated benefit. So what exactly is your objection? The precedent, Richard snapped. Personal projects, is this personal? Margaret asked sharply. It sounds like a well-executed workforce development initiative with measurable results. The cost per student is average, another board member said, checking his tablet. National programs run $5,000 to $8,000 per successful placement. This program is about 6. Efficient actually. Questions continued another 30 minutes. Sarah answered them all, confidence building with every nod from the board. Finally, Ben called for a vote, all in favor of continuing funding and supporting Miss Mitchell's leadership. 11 hands rose, only Richard abstained. Motion carries, Ben said. Margaret raised her hand again. I move that we expand the program to 2 additional locations within the next year and invite corporate sponsors to join us. Second, David said. All in favor. 12 hands, even Richards. Afterward, board members approached Sarah, congratulating her. Margaret squeezed her hands. That was the most powerful presentation I've heard in 25 years. We need more people like you. David handed her his card. Let's discuss partnership possibilities. Richard left silently, eyes calculating. Ben walked Sarah to her car. You were incredible, he said. I was terrified. You didn't show it. You changed minds. We changed them, she corrected. All of us who believe people deserve chances. Ben looked at her with profound gratitude. My father was right. You're saving lives. I'm just paying forward what I was given, she said. Kindness multiplies. That evening, Ben sat alone in his office, thinking of the past year, his father wandering in the snow, Sarah stopping when no one else did, everything that had followed. A year ago he'd been successful and empty, measuring life in metrics that didn't matter. Sarah had changed that, slowly, steadily. She'd shown him what mattered: connection, compassion, using privilege to lift others. The company was different now, better, and they were just getting started. Ben opened his laptop and began writing, not a memo but a letter to the board, thanking them, outlining his vision, inviting them into something larger than profit margins. He wrote late into the night. When he finally shut his computer, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like he was building something that mattered.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.